Stephen Colbert says everyone should listen to Slate's Political Gabfest. And he knows. He was on it. Called the best political podcast in America, the show reaches an audience of almost 255,000 every month. Gabfest hosts are Slate senior editor Emily Bazelon, chief political correspondent John Dickerson, and editor David Plotz. And please welcome Andy Bauer, executive producer of Gabfest.
Thank you, everyone. I just want to give you a few logistical details so you know what you're going to be watching tonight. For those of you who aren't that familiar with the show, the Political Gabfest started in 2005, so we've been doing it for quite a while. And the genesis of it was, the idea was that journalists, you know, they go on TV, they do Washington Week in Review, shows like that. They sometimes don't talk quite as honestly as they do when they go to the bar after the show. What we wanted was the show that replicated as much as possible that bar conversation. And in fact, they did go to a cocktail hour a few minutes ago, so you may get exactly that. But a few little details for you. First of all, we are recording this for our podcast. We also have a radio show that this makes up a part of on WNYC in New York. So what you're going to see is they're going to have to record separate intros for the two of those. They will do one, stop, start over again. You're looking behind the curtain of how radio is made. So don't be alarmed. Be interested if you want to be. The other thing is, because this is a live show, we really want your participation. A silent room when you tell people that you're doing a live show sounds kind of awkward. So feel free to laugh, to cheer, to boo, to hiss, whatever emotion you are feeling, feel free to express it with your mouth. Oh, yeah. There you go. All right, and there will be a short question and answer period at the end if you want to think up what you'd like to ask them, provocative things they've said, things you'd like to argue with them about. They love to argue. So, without further ado, let me bring out David Plotz, Emily Bazelon, and John Dickerson.
I don't love to argue.
What?
I don't love to argue. I'm a child of divorced parents. Everybody has to get along.
But David and I love to argue.
Right. So I try to be the synthesis.
It's true. I think one of the problems with the show, actually, is that you don't love to argue enough. Because when you do decide to argue, you play dirty, and it makes it all better.
Why? Just because
You mean by using facts?
He plays dirty.
I don't think it's using facts. It's very hard to see you. You're all there. Okay.
Hey!
So we're so glad to be here tonight, and as Andy said, we'll do two intros at the beginning. So don't be surprised by that. And then the show will kind of proceed. We'll have advertising. There'll be advertising, so feel free to go buy the products that are being advertised during the show. In fact, there'll be one advertisement that everyone's going to love. Like you're going to love both.
However,
of them.
the other one, don't worry about it.
Well, one is that we have a local ad. It's like having a local mattress store sponsoring us. We have the equivalent of a local mattress store sponsoring the show tonight.
Where'd you come up with local mattress store?
I know, that's not
You know how you watch local TV and there's always a mattress store? That's what it is.
Okay.
So, and please do express your opinions and let the folks at home who don't have the good fortune of being here know that you're here and they're not. You guys ready? So this is going to be the first radio intro, and then we'll do the podcast intro. Hello and welcome to Gabfest Radio from Slate and WNYC. I'm David Plotz, live in front of a packed house at the Jewish Community Center in San Francisco. Paul Ryan and Patty Murray have struck a bipartisan budget deal without any of the chaos and fury we've come to expect from Congress. Has the political climate in Washington actually changed? Then, President Obama's approval ratings are low, but healthcare.gov may be recovering. Is it possible to save his second term? Can any second presidential term be saved? And then, San Francisco and New York have become playgrounds for the rich. Is the wealth of Wall Street and Silicon Valley destroying the heterogeneous character that makes both those cities so great? And of course, we'll have cocktail chatter. Joining me on the stage here at the Jewish Community Center are Slate's chief political correspondent, John Dickerson. Hello, John.
Hello, David.
And Slate senior editor, Emily Bazelon. Hi, Emily. All right, now, this is the real one. This is the real intro. That was just for the New Yorkers who hear the radio show. And well, you might boo. Hello, and welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest for the week of December 13th, 2013, the Why Don't the Homeless Just Use Uber edition. I'm David Plotz, the editor of Slate, and the Gabfest is live tonight in front of a sold-out hall, the Jewish Community Center of San Francisco. This is the Gabfest's first trip to California. We're expecting your famous hospitality. Is there famous California hospitality? I don't know.
They
yeah,
say
sure.
yes. Sure
It's not
there
like
is.
Kentucky or Arkansas, though. Joining me on stage is John Dickerson, Slate's chief political correspondent. Hello, John. And then, of course, there's Emily Bazelon, one of many journalists birthed by the San Francisco media culture.
It's true.
And it's a little-known fact that Emily got her start covering the San Ramon City Council for the now-defunct Tri-Valley Herald. The archive, I did a little Googling. The archive does not go back that far, or I would have collected some of the greatest Bazelon hits. But Emily, tell us, what was the best story you did for the Tri-Valley Herald?
The best story I did was about a guy. It was a serious story. I shouldn't be laughing. It was about a guy who was accused of, I think, assault and battery, maybe also attempted murder. I'm forgetting, but accused of a serious crime for transmitting HIV to a woman he had had sex with. And it was one of the first prosecutions of HIV transmission in the country. So for me, that was like super exciting. And the best thing about it was I had gone to be friendly with this San Ramon cop, and he realized I would be really into the story, and he gave it to me because we had a rival newspaper we went head to head with. So I had the story, and the other paper didn't, which basically has never happened to me again in my life. It was great.
Now you don't have like Supreme Court justices saying, "I'm going to leak you."
I don't.
Breyer's like, "I don't want Thomas to leak it to the Fox. I'm going to give it to Bazelon."
That would be so nice. Oh well.
So this week on the Political Gabfest, Congress, which is incapable of naming a post office without rancor, appears likely to pass a bipartisan budget deal before the end of the year. How on earth did that happen? And does it herald a change in DC's awful political climate? Then, President Obama's second term, made rocky by shutdown and healthcare.gov, is less than one quarter over, yet it already feels done. Can it be saved? And then, as we were flying in my helicopter over here this evening, I looked out over the city, the fleets of Google buses racing through the streets, looked down on the 22-year-old tech billionaires bathing in their penthouse pools, sucking shots of biodynamic tequila off the bodies of Belgian supermodels, while Alice Water tended the grill in the background. And I thought, what a wonderful city. So we'll talk about the fierce battle about whether rich people are destroying San Francisco and New York and London. Plus, of course, we'll have cocktail chatter and a Q&A. Thanks for applauding, John.
I know. Well, that was good. You did.
I feel like, we get introduced, and people, acknowledge that I'm here, and
I
they
know, I was
roar
thinking
for
that.
Emily, and yet you get there's no
And no
love
one
for David
says-
Plotz.
All right. Nicely done. Good.
Okay. I don't need that. My ego doesn't need that.
He appreciated it. He really did. That's what he meant to say.
Thank you, John. All right, now we'll actually do the show.
Don't feel uncomfortable.
On Tuesday night, House Budget Committee Chairman Paul Ryan, he of the baby blue eyes, and House and Senate Budget Committee Chairwoman Patty Murray, she of the tennis shoes, announced that they had reached a bipartisan budget deal for 2014. Amazingly, this deal was reached without any government shutdown, any threat of default, any public histrionics, any feigned heart attacks, Twitter hoaxes, assassinations, blackmail, or NSA black ops. John, what is in this deal, and how on earth did it come to pass without fury?
Well, there's not a lot in the deal, and that's why it didn't have the normal rancor. It's very easy to pass a deal. That's being a little too glib.
But they have to have
that's
a
hard to
budget.
show.
I mean, just that has been an enormous obstacle.
Right. Okay. So I guess it's like, as John Harwood of the New York Times said, it's like kicking like a 5-yard field goal. It's not.
That would
if
be
you
hard.
haven't
That would be a
cooked-
really steep angle.
Fine.
Okay, but if you haven't kicked a
Okay. An
20-yard
8-yard field goal, whatever field goal is of such distance that is not so short that it's difficult because of the angle, but not so far away that it's. So maybe this is better. It's like making pasta, right? You boil the water, you put in the pasta, right? But if your house is like some animal house, and every time you go to put the pasta in the well, first of all, the water's been turned off for 4 years, so you can't put water in the pot. You
can't
actually
light
don't
the
have a
stove.
pot, right? Because it's been beaten to all hell and is misshapen. And every time you go to put the pasta in the pot, somebody like dives and knocks it out of your hand, and it goes scattering all over the floor. So simply making pasta is an achievement relative to pasta all over the floor. But it's not an achievement, relative to,
making a whole dinner.
making, right, or Chateaubriand for two. So anyway, what do I mean by that? So the big debates in the last budget fights going back to 2011 have basically been about how do you get revenue, and do you do it through the tax code? And then are you going to touch entitlements? And which entitlements are you going to touch, and how are you going to do it? And we remember the grand bargain from 2011 that broke down over these difficult questions. None of those questions really were engaged in this debate. Basically, what they did was they put the budget. What we do have, which is a significant achievement, is that basically a budget, some top-line numbers have been agreed to for the next 2 years, so there won't be these constant crisis moments. However, just because you set a top-line number doesn't mean you've arrange the appropriations bill. So there may still be some fighting to come. But before they couldn't even get, the pasta in the water. So they've agreed to a top line number. There are some fees in it, which Republicans have basically agreed to pretend are not taxes, but they are taxes. And then there's some spending reduction, but basically what the good side of this is that there's some spending reduction, but it's in the future, which economists mostly think is a good idea because you want growth now, not to cut things back. It removes the craziness of the sequestration, the across-the-board sort of stupid cuts.
Not really.
Remove some of it.
But part of
Remove
it.
some
But
of
there
it.
are so the sequestration kicks in year by year by year, and so the coming kick-in, which was going to be even worse, compound the sequestration of before, has been avoided. So that's what they've avoided by replacing it with other cuts and fees on your plane flights and things like that. So right, the entire budget problems haven't been fixed, but they've a whole new round of cuts we're going to cut in, and now aren't, particularly on defense, and so they've worked some of that out.
So Emily, who won this?
I was going to argue that the Republicans won because some of sequestration continues. Am I wrong about that? Did that change?
So
Did I get this wrong?
the levels of spending have not significantly increased.
Risen.
So the reason Republicans may have won is that part of the contributions come from federal pension, so greater pension contributions from federal employees who just don't happen to be incredibly politically popular. So they are getting, nobody's going to stand up for them right now. Although some Democrats may vote against this. But that's one of the ways in which Republicans may
And
have won.
also, it seemed like Nancy Pelosi was going to make a stand for extending unemployment insurance, and then they totally caved on that.
Yeah.
Right. So Emily, let's talk about these taxes and fees. Our colleague Matt Iglesias had a great little metaphor here, even better than the pasta metaphor, which was talking about how there was a move a few years ago. A lot of kids who were saving themselves for marriage would have anal sex and oral sex, but not vaginal sex. And they'd be like, "Oh, we're pure." So and Matt was saying this is basically what the Republicans have done.
You know what? I
over
like the
taxes and
pasta
fees.
metaphor better. A lot better.
But so these things where you're going to go to the airport, you're going to pay extra for your ticket, and it's a payment to the government for using the service.
Sounds a lot like a tax.
And is it a tax or a fee? Why is it that is this a tenable model for going forward, where instead of calling things taxes, we'll call them fees, and that's a way to get away with doing this?
Sounds pretty good to me. I mean, if the point is to raise revenue, then I'm not sure. It seems like such an obvious face-saving device. I don't really see how the Republicans are going to sell it as not a tax. And in fact, the Cato Institute immediately came out and attacked them for rolling over on this point. But when you think about the amount of revenue they agreed to raise, it's not high, right? And so, the real work that needs to be done on the federal income tax, all of that real progress and revamping has all been put off yet again. And the same is true of entitlement reform. We're not getting any of it.
Right. And those questions weren't engaged because they've broken their pick on those questions for the last 4 years. And so.
Right. And the politics of this moment are not conducive to any kind of.
Right. And they'll get even worse next year.
Right. Because of the midterm.
Right.
elections.
And so one question I had, and not to scare you, but we have another debt ceiling showdown that's coming in February or March. So does this deal suggest there will not be a debt ceiling showdown? The Republicans want to get to midterms. They have, in Obamacare, they have a fabulous issue that they can batter Democrats with, and they'll just extend the debt ceiling. They'll hold it hostage just a little bit. But
right.
Well, I don't know what you're. Sometimes
No,
you're
they
up,
won't.
Sometimes you're sideways.
I'm sending you mixed signals.
What?
No, they. Well, we should talk about the fight that this budget deal has created in the Republican Party, because it's a pretty interesting one. It's actually politically.
But that's not answering David's question.
I'm just saying let's not lose sight of it, so that because it's really important. But it's also part of this, which is to say that part of the reason they're making this deal is that the last government shutdown and debt ceiling adventure that some of the Republicans led their party into was such a political disaster that it's given what some people call the establishment forces much more power to get this deal through and likely passed. And that same weight will keep them from coming to another debt ceiling showdown, because, as you pointed out earlier, they'd much rather have a fight over health care than bleed numbers and have their approval rating go through the basement on one of these fiscal
So
fights.
debt ceiling, you think debt ceiling will come and go in March without too much of a fuss?
Oh, how exciting!
Yeah,
That's
I
good.
do. I do. In part because if you look at say the compassion numbers and some of this polling we're going to talk about later, but Democrats have a 28-point advantage over Republicans when you ask the question, who cares about you and regular people? That's a vast chasm. And when you get into budget fights, you tend to...
By regular people, you mean corporations.
Yeah.
Those are persons.
When you get into budget fights, it tends to be on that territory who's fighting for you, and Republicans don't want to have a fight on a territory where they're at a 28-point disadvantage, and that's what a government shutdown fight would get into. They'd rather have a fight on healthcare, which is not popular.
Right. So Emily, given all this, is it obvious that conservatives are going to agree to this and they'll vote for it, and this will all go through fine?
Well, it seems to me that because Paul Ryan is behind this deal, a lot of the reality-based Republican Party is going to line up, probably with relief, to get to vote for something without a huge amount of Sturm and Drang. But there's got to be that, I don't know if it's 20% of them, but that the people who have refused to vote for anything, the people who can come through this Congress and say, I pass not a single bill of any import, and that's a victory, and that's why you should reelect me. Those people aren't going to vote for this budget. And the other thing is the primary challengers who are out there who are trying to unseat the more... the word mainstream seems a little, I'm not sure anyway, the people who vote, the Republicans who vote for this, they are going to have primary challengers in the redder states, and those challengers, I'm sure, will try to make something of this. I was wondering when I read the Cato Institute just absolute excoriation of this bill, if they were doing it exactly to make sure that the Republicans who stand up to the bill feel like they have some intellectual support behind them.
Well, as you pointed out, the Republicans who are standing up to the bill actually don't need Cato's help. I mean, because they come from districts in which they are applauded for hating this, so they don't need. Yeah. What's interesting about that is that it wasn't just it was Cato, Heritage Action, the Club for Growth. These organizations that claim to or do represent sort of grassroots Tea Party fiscal conservatives. John Boehner, when he went to his conference this morning, Wednesday morning, said to them, this is a good deal. It reduces the deficit. We didn't give in on taxes. You should vote for this bill. And these groups that are saying it's bad before they've even read it are tricking you. They're tricking the American people. And they're doing this not because they have policy differences, but because they're trying to raise money. Now, that's something people whisper and say.
Yeah, that's a lot of spine for John Boehner to
well,
show.
Is he
going to pay a price for that?
Because that goes to motive, right? It's not just we have a big debate about these guys are totally.
Yeah, we're going to trick you is pretty. That's
so
big...
you heard this during the sequestration fight. You get to Republican senators who hated the Ted Cruz approach were saying, he's basically fooling people.
But that was John McCain. I remember saying that out loud. It was not Boehner.
No. I know, but I'm saying the sentiment was in the Senate. What's new here is that Boehner is saying it, and he said it out loud at his press conference. It's one thing to say it to your colleagues, but then it's another thing to say it out loud. So what he's done is basically taken this fight in the party between the kind of grassroots populist conservatives and Washington establishment, and that would also include the Wall Street Journal and the Weekly Standard and the National Review, and said basically these people are morally corrupt who are in these institutions trying to trick the grassroots. That's a huge political, and also it's a break in tradition but break in Boehner's posture, which has often been to kind of try to control through kind of messy but not confrontational ways, that part of his conference.
So how do we understand that? I mean, I think of Boehner as someone who's very canny about the small risks he takes. And if he said that out loud, it suggests to me that he's decided for some reason this is not very risky. Why is that?
Because of the shutdown. Because the numbers of and that's sort of proof of it, that he's not going to pay a big penalty because it's now become such conventional wisdom within Republican ranks that the last shutdown was such a disaster, we can't, as Republicans, mess with it again, and because they have other tactical reasons, meaning they want health care to be.
And the Chamber of Commerce, the business community must be behind him on that, right?
Yeah.
So last question on this. Democrats didn't get unemployment insurance extended to the people who it should be extended for. They have agreed to budget numbers which are more than $100 billion less than what President Obama wanted originally. They've agreed to roll back the sequestration cuts on the military, which they want to make. How is this not, they got no significant tax increases, which they want. How is this not just a complete capitulation by the Democrats?
It seems to me like the Republicans basically won, and I guess you could say that at least there was no incursions on Social Security and Medicare, which the Republicans wanted. But given that the Democrats control the Senate and the presidency, that seems like small beans relative to the whole.
I think you could argue that, also you got the federal employees who now have to contribute more to their pensions, which is something Democrats, I think that if you were trying to salvage this for Democrats, I think you could argue, well, for 2 years now, we're not going to have these budget fights. That means if the economy is getting better,
we will have these budget. That's just nonsense. We're going to have these budget fights.
But it's important. The reason we're going to have budget fights is that, again, you can agree to a top line number, but you still have to come up with the details. And Barbara Mikulski's going to have one set of details in the Appropriations Committee in the Senate, and in the House they're going to have a much different set of appropriations. So there still will be conflicts, but there may not be as many. The conflicts won't lead to shutdowns. And the idea is, if the economy really is getting better, and you can settle something for 2 years, that it might actually have some beneficial effect on the economy. And that might not be bad for Democrats.
The irony of that, of course, being that the shutdown was good for Democrats at the polls.
Right, but a sustained shutdown.
A sustained lift in the economy, and then you also imagine Obamacare has ceased to be a disaster and unfolds from here on out successfully. What an idea.
All right.
It also means you can also move on to other issues like minimum wage, income inequality, other issues Democrats think they might have a cleaner shot on.
Okay, so we're going to do two little promos here. Is President Obama already a lame duck? You're listening to Gabfest Radio from Slate and WNYC. Coming up, are the rich destroying San Francisco and New York or making them better than ever? You're listening to Gabfest Radio from Slate and WNYC.
Surely WNYC will pick the latter, right?
The latter topic?
Yeah.
You think so?
Uh-huh.
Maybe.
Unless
I
we
mean,
go
I would
on
pick the latter
endlessly.
topic. Yeah, I would definitely. That's going to be our star topic. And now we have a message from the Gabfest first sponsor this week. This is not the mattress sponsor. Our Gabfest first sponsor this week, Stamps.com. With the holidays almost here, you don't have time to go to the post office. There's the traffic, the parking. It'll be packed with everyone mailing their holiday gifts and packages. So use Stamps.com instead. With Stamps.com, you can avoid all the hassle of going to the post office during the busy holiday season. Everything you would do at the post office, you can do right from your desk. You can buy and print official U.S. postage using your own computer and printer. You can print postage for any letter or package the instant you need it, and the postal carrier will pick it up. It's easy and convenient, and right now you can get a special offer when you use our promo code GABFEST. Yeah, our promo code GABFEST. Thank you.
John couldn't remember it.
John just never knows what the promo code is.
I outsource this part of the show to you.
It's a no-risk trial and a $110 bonus offer, which includes a digital scale and up to $55 in free postage. For all the details of the special offer and to sign up today, go to Stamps.com. Before you do anything else, click on the microphone at the top of the homepage and type in GABFEST. That's Stamps.com. Enter GABFEST. So it's hard to believe, but President Obama is less than 1/4 of the way. Whoa.
It's Andy in your ear.
That terrified me.
Yes, Andy.
That was very. Where's he coming?
Yeah.
Where's that?
It was very godlike.
Yes, what is it, Andy?
Keep talking.
From all around.
You do, in fact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You need to read the coming back from WNYC promo.
Oh, coming. It's a spirit.
Right.
So the coming back is.
Coming back from the break.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think it's. Wait, I have
Probably
that.
on the same page.
Yeah. No, I don't think I have it on this page, so I'm just going to wing it. So well, I'll do it, and then you can tell me if it's right. Or don't, just be silent if it's right. If it's wrong, you can interrupt. Okay, here we go. I'm David Plotz, along with John Dickerson and Emily Bazelon, and this is the Political Gabfest portion of the show. It's hard to believe, but President Obama is less than 1/4 of the way through his second term, and it already feels like it's over. The troubles with healthcare.gov, the budget showdown, the weakness in the economy, the Syria fiasco, maybe not such a fiasco.
What?
Not such a fiasco, okay. They've all dented him. The Syria thing definitely hurt him. And it sent his poll numbers last month to the lowest level they have ever been, his lowest approval ratings by far. He's bounced back a little in recent weeks, we'll talk about that. Still way where he would want to be. Less than half of voters approve of him. A clear majority of voters don't trust him. Half of voters are actively opposed to the Affordable Care Act. So Emily, is it over? Here we are, it's late 2013, he's barely started a second term, but is it done?
No, it's not over because this is about healthcare.gov and the president's promise that everybody could keep the healthcare they had that they liked, which turned out to be a false promise. And now that the website is working, much better at least, and people are signing up for it, if Obamacare can roll forward and people feel like this program is working and they start to see its benefits, then his approval ratings are going to start to come back. So he's badly damaged. He's like staggering in the corner, but he's not out of the fight yet.
Where's he on the pasta question?
He would really like to just make the pasta peacefully, put a little Parmesan cheese on it, and yet.
So John, do you share Emily's view that it's okay if that the main question is healthcare.gov, if that turns up, that he's okay?
Yeah, but I think it's limited. So 34% of the people think that healthcare.gov is going well, and so the question is, if the future.
Who are those
That is
people?
a lot.
What?
Yeah, I
Well,
was
they
in
have
that group.
they have a larger view, right? They think, hey, it's, in the end, this thing is going to, help the 47
They're
million
so
people who are
benevolent and
uninsured.
patient.
Well, and they have a rooting interest in the success of the president because they're from his team.
So they're partisan.
They
I
were,
suppose.
and they think actually, if you sign up 500,000 people and put them in Medicaid who didn't have health insurance before, that's not a bad thing.
Can I just tell a great story?
Oh,
A
they're
great
here.
story,
The
but it-
34%.
That's
A
right.
great story I learned. So we had a little cocktail party before with some Gabfest fans who were many
Who
of
are
them are
here.
here. But someone told me a great story about how he had signed up, and he was trying to sign up for Medicaid, and he signed up, goes through the process, and he gets mailed a PDF, and he opens the PDF, and it's blank. And it's 11-page blank PDF. It's not strictly blank. It has bullet points, but nothing following the bullet points.
Awesome.
And then things that are underlined, but there's nothing there. And so he called up, and they said, oh, yeah, that means you signed up for Medicaid.
Is it in like secret handwriting? So if you printed it out and spilled the right thing on it, the letters
Right,
would
right,
be
exactly.
It was a puzzle.
secret code.
So if
Oh my God.
if the president's real ratings are linked to healthcare, then how? So healthcare has to get a lot better, and it also has to affect the right kind of people. I mean, the challenge with healthcare has always been that there are a lot of people in the country who basically see it as a welfare program. So they don't, and they see it as a threat to their own
Then
healthcare.
signing up all those people for Medicaid is not going to touch them.
Exactly. And so, or signing up people not for Medicaid, but who were in the individual market or who had some other arrangement, didn't have any health insurance at all, and now can get health insurance. Those people are, they'll be happy, but they may very well already been sort of on the president's team or predisposed to him. So as the question is, like, how does healthcare have to get better for other people to see it? I think when it is getting better, people will stop hearing about how it's not going well, and so they'll stop being given evidence for why they might not think the president's doing very well, which will tick his numbers up a few, but mostly then it will perhaps change the conversation to the economy. And what's interesting in these polls, although I think you can explain this, but is that I think it was the Bloomberg poll, 64% of people said the stock market would be rising without the president. More than 50% said that the benefits and the unemployment that are happening despite the president. In other words, they're not ready to give him any credit. Now, I think that they may say that, but if we have a sustained several months with jobs numbers like the last month, by sort of osmosis, it will benefit the president. And I think that will be more powerful than the benefits in healthcare.gov, which are less direct to enough people to lift his poll numbers.
But do you think some of that is also about giving, if you are down on him because of Obamacare right now, then you would start answering all those questions. No, I'm not giving him credit, right? So here's one question I have based on what you were just saying about what would have to happen with healthcare. Do you think that most middle-class people, the people who Obama needs to reach, do you think most of them know someone who will benefit from Obamacare, someone who had a pre-existing condition or was in their 20s and now gets signed up for their parents, or for a variety, gets a good plan through an individual, through the exchange that they didn't have before? I mean, in other words, could this be like gay rights, where because eventually you are personally affected by someone you know, you start to feel sunnier?
I think it's a great question. I think more people know people who are either looking for a job or have been out of work or at the perils of a shaky economy. And so if the economy gets better and they hear their friends getting hired, there's more likelihood. I'm just repeating my last point, but I think there's more of those folks.
And also more people know people who've been kicked off a plan right now than
Right. Well, that's the problem with the broken promise.
And also the people I just heard from somebody in an email today who said they just got their new premiums. They're furious that they're high, and they're blaming all the people who are getting subsidies. Now, there's no correlation, but they're still angry. And so this is a middle-class person who's not happy, even though they know somebody who's benefited from
it was sort of the
I don't think it's going to have the same beneficial effect, in part because one thing that is going to happen over the next year, 2 years, is that the Republicans there's not going to be any legislation in the Congress to fix the bill. All that there's going to be is investigations, Kathleen Sebelius dragged in front of Congress to testify about why this or that has gone wrong. The lawsuits, which may well totally gut the bill. It doesn't appear to me that it's on a glide path, towards a happy landing.
On the other hand, there should start to be success stories, the kinds of stories the administration is starved for right now, where they can show the people who were suffering and who would have lost everything are being taken care of now.
Right. Yeah, the question, I think they'd be happier to have success stories on the economy.
But now you're making an argument that sort of no matter how well healthcare goes, it doesn't matter enough because of the economy.
think the economy's more powerful. He's got, but look, of the two things that he has control over, he has more control over getting healthcare.gov to work better than he does the economy at the moment. What I wonder from either one of the two of you is, if you're faced with a situation where, so the comparison is between is he going to be like Carter and George Herbert Walker Bush, who saw their approval ratings go down and a series of things that only kind of kept them low? Or is he going to be like Clinton and Reagan, who saw bad things happen in their second term, but their approval ratings went up? The distinction and difference, of course, is that the economies were a lot better for those two presidents who saw their approval ratings go up. But if you were a president and you had 3 more years to go and had a Congress, one house or branch of Congress that didn't want to work with you, and you had a public that was kind of tired of you, as these polls suggest, you still have this, you're still like, you have a big job. Yeah. So what would you do?
Well, I
Fill
think
all those vacancies.
But you can't fill all the vacancies.
You can just go to the filibuster. You can fill a lot more of them.
No, you can't, because there's all these procedural measures.
No, you're too caught up in the blue slip. If they start abusing, if the senators, if Republican senators start abusing the blue slip, then Patrick Leahy can say no more blue slip.
Well, look, they're not going to fill all those vacancies really quickly, and most of those vacancies are not. Those are appointments that last the next 2 years. They're not appointments that last a lifetime.
Not all the judgeships. You're forgetting the things that I care about.
I mean, to me, well, all of this,
and that actually matter, though. Make the case.
And are lasting.
It's not just your parochial thing. It matters to people's lives.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So dismissive.
Have you guys done pandering? You
mean by saying things that make sense?
I mean, this whole thing points up to me that the.
What do you want him to do?
What do I want him to do? Well, it's clear he cannot do anything legislatively. Congress will not do anything. He's going to lose. The Democrats are going to lose seats in 2014. They will probably lose the Senate.
No immigration
reform is dead. It will not pass.
He traded it for gun control and didn't get any gun control.
He didn't get gun control. He didn't get immigration reform. He, foreign policy will do what foreign policy does, but I don't think he's going to go on he's not going to start a war, I wouldn't think. So
that's good.
So, no, that is good, but there's not very much that he can do. There's administrative stuff, but they're going to be so caught up in the lawsuits over Obamacare, which are going to continue, so caught up in the trying to get Obamacare to work that I just don't see anything.
What about the moral power of the office? What if he went and gave his inequality speech that he gave last week? Was it just last week? And went across the country and just wouldn't shut up about it. I mean,
he has to make a better speech. That was not a great speech. That was like a term paper speech.
Well, I know, but I'm trying to find. Otherwise, he'll be home alone. Who knows? He'll be 3 years.
Here's my proposal. Here's my proposal. So what clearly to me what has happened? So I was looking back at second terms. Second terms are terrible. Right? There is not a good second term.
One shudders actually. Reading about them is so dismaying.
I mean, Eisenhower apparently had a terrible second term.
FDR's was okay.
LBJ had. I'm going to get to that point in a second. LBJ. He had his second term was a catastrophe. The Reagan second term, Iran-Contra. Clinton second term was the Lewinsky scandal. I mean, it was good economically, but it was just beset by ridiculousness. George W. Bush's second term, you had Katrina, you had the Iraq War, you had the Social Security fiasco. It's not a good time. Why are second terms so bad? Because presidents have no legislative SWAT. Why do they have no legislative SWAT? Because there's no potential for them to run for a third term. We need to repeal the 22nd Amendment or whatever amendment it is, which leaves open the possibility that a president can have the authority, can have the influence to run for another term so that the people in the party have to pay attention to him.
But okay,
ooh, that's really unpopular. Keep going with that. You really have the audience with you.
But wait, if that were true,
I'm not here for them. I'm here for the country.
But if that were true, wouldn't you have seen lots of
revel in your scorn.
You wear it as a badge of honor.
Right there.
Just wouldn't if your theory were true, wouldn't we see a huge amount of legislation in the end of first terms from presidents?
Well, the end of basically we're in a position now where we're losing 4 years out of every 8. Because the last year of a presidency, they can't do anything because they're running for re-election, and that year is lost. The pre-presidential year is a basically lost year. And then the second term president loses the last 3 years of the term. Because
you fled my question, though. It's only through legislation that he can do stuff. There's nothing else that he can do that would be useful and through
Well, John, I'm unimpressed that the only example you can give is the president goes and barnstorms some speeches about inequality, and then he won't be able to get a minimum wage, a federal minimum wage hike He's not going to be able to get that through Congress because they have the legislative control.
He
What
could
what
do-
exactly is he going to do on
That's
this
my question to
barnstorming
you.
tour? No, my question, I've already offered my solution. My solution is
Change the Constitution.
Change the Constitution to give them a
Well, I'm going to imagine
We-
a can
A thir-
opener.
a third
and
term.
So,
We left out energy. We left out global warming. We left out the EPA.
Yeah, he's doing a lot on that.
stricter. Well, he has used the EPA to regulate carbon emissions in a way that was stricter than before. And there are a couple of Supreme Court challenges to that this term, but if the administration wins, which if there's sort of a logic to the way the law develops, they should win, then he could do more on that front with his pen.
So going back to you, John, what besides having the president barnstorm this
Well,
tour
I'm not
with that
saying that's
not
right.
very good inequality
Did
speech,
you not like
would
my
you have
answer,
him do?
or did you just decide that you were moving
It was a good
along?
answer, but I want John to offer one other thing besides that. You talk about the power of the office.
yeah, I
What
don't
is
know.
the power
He's
of the
gotta find
office that he
something.
has?
Well, I don't know. Perhaps immigration is an issue that he could
There's
find
more
some
he could
creative
do
and interesting way
with
to.
executive orders on
work with.
immigration too.
What I'm looking for, if it was easy and predictable, then maybe some president would have done it. I'm just thinking that, especially with the acuity of the minds on this stage, that you might.
That
there
you,
might be,
I'm throwing it
had
to you.
to-
Where's use that acuity?
I asked the question because I lack it.
I feel like maybe you're proposing an alternative structural reform. Usually when we think about this, we worry about the midterm elections and the way in which there's an inevitable almost backlash against the president, and then you lock in gridlock because you have the other party in control of one or both houses. So do you think that you're allowing presidents to run for a third term would also address that structural problem, or do you're leaving that in place and this is like another piece on the chessboard you're moving around?
Right. I don't think it does leave that in place, and most presidents wouldn't be able to run for a third term. It wouldn't work in all circumstances. I just think that the fact that a president
It's off
is
the table.
unable to pretend that he's going to be there, and especially with a vice president who's probably not going to run for president, there is no influence from the White House on the legislative branch at all.
But the influence of the White House is not, the lack of influence of the White House is not related to whether he's going to be elected to another term or not. It's a result of the fact that he has one branch of Congress that doesn't want to work with him. That's not going to be improved if he keeps getting elected.
Well, but
And that the Democrats feel like he blew it on healthcare and left them hanging out to dry, and they're angry about that.
Yeah, right.
so all of which suggests that
If his
the
approval
Democrats
ratings
won't work
were
with
high,
anyway.
he would
with
have
him.
influence, right?
If what?
If his approval ratings were high, if his approval ratings
You know what,
were,
though?
that wouldn't matter?
Well, it's not going to matter for, Senator Pryor and Landrieu and Kay Hagan and people who are running in red states where his approval rating isn't ever going to
But
get
isn't
any
that
higher.
a small? There are three of those left.
Well,
over, red
three
state
more and they lose
Democrats.
control of the Senate.
Right.
So,
Right.
All right. So we're settled. We're going to repeal that amendment. Good. So now we have a word from our second sponsor tonight. This is our mattress sponsor. This is the best sponsor ever for a live show. The podcast is brought to you by the University of California. Yeah. Do we have any UC grads here? Yeah. Lots of you. Good. So for almost 150 years, the UC system has been a beacon of innovation, making the future bold and pushing the boundaries of today's health and science. Today's breakthrough: how positive are you that the memories inside your head are real? Think about that for a second. Do you remember John or Emily making a good point? Then it probably is not real. Most of us think our memories are foolproof, but Professor Elizabeth Loftus knows better. Her research has found that memories are easily manipulated, and that much of what we think we remember may actually be the result of suggestion. Repeal that amendment. To read this story and uncover more groundbreaking innovations by the University of California, visit slate.com/breakthroughs. Now, we're going to bring out a special guest for our third topic and for Cocktail Chatter. One of the very best podcasts in the world, a podcast that you need to be listening to. It's this podcast you should listen to right after us, first us, then this, is created by the fever genius brain of a man who has the most wonderful name in podcasting, Roman Mars. He is the creator and host of 99% Invisible, a locally grown podcast about the built world around you. It's an incredibly great podcast. We are thrilled to have him join us to talk about this last topic, which is about the huge surge in wealth and the rise of Silicon Valley and how it's changing this city and how wealth in general is changing cities around the world. So Roman, where are you? Come on up and join us. All right.
There it is.
Are we doing some chair? Does everyone have a
is
good
good.
angle of attack?
Yeah.
Can you guys see Roman a little bit over there? Okay. So now I need to basically reintroduce that segment. I'm David Plotz, along with John Dickerson and Emily Bazelon, and this is the Political Gabfest portion of the show. The wealthy increasingly own everything that's worth owning in New York and San Francisco, as Wall Street and Silicon Valley's success is radically reshaping the cities associated with them. Are these 1% cities good for the cities themselves? Joining us to talk about this is Roman Mars, creator of the San Francisco-based podcast and radio show 99% Invisible. Welcome, Roman.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Greg Gottman, who's the CEO of a tech startup named Angel Hack, wrote this on his Facebook page this week about San Francisco. The difference is in other cosmopolitan cities, the lower part of societies keep to themselves. They sell small trinkets, beg coyly, stay quiet, and generally stay out of your way. They realize it's a privilege to be in the civilized part of town and view themselves as guests, and that's okay. In downtown San Francisco, the degenerates gather like hyenas, spit, urinate, taunt you, sell drugs, get rowdy. They act like they own their center of the city, like it's their place of leisure. In actuality, it's the business district for one of the wealthiest cities in the USA. It's a disgrace. I don't even feel safe walking down the sidewalk without planning out my walking path. You can preach compassion, equality, and be the biggest lover in the world, but there's an area of town for degenerates and an area of the town for the working class. There's nothing positive to gain from having them so close to us. And well, you might boo. Yes. So Greg Gottman did apologize, but
And to whom did he exactly apologize?
he apologized on Facebook.
On Facebook, yeah.
He
Yeah,
said,
no, but I mean,
Only after
but
his
who did he address his apology to?
Probably to his
The
investors.
great unwashed
Those-
masses.
That was my point, which isn't really an apology at all.
So we've come to San Francisco at a fantastic moment. I haven't been here for a few years. I don't know if you have. It's stunning. The
They've
wealth is
missed you.
stunning, and the kind of omnipresent conversations about technology and wealth. The protests blocking the Google bus that we hear about, the earlier protests outside Twitter, the fact that San Francisco has now become the most expensive rental market in the nation, with a $3,250 being the average rental for a two-bedroom apartment. So there have been a bunch of pieces about this. The New York Times has written about this. A piece by our former colleague Farhad Manjoo in San Francisco Magazine basically paints the rise of wealth in the city as a unadulterated good. George Packer in The New Yorker was much more skeptical, and he was sort of saying it's ruining the city. There's a similar fight going on in New York about Wall Street, the election of Bill de Blasio, who ran as the idea that there shouldn't be two cities. He didn't want to have a city for the rich and a city for the poor. So we wanted to talk about this. And so Roman, start us off. As a San Franciscan, tell us about what you see as the major changes to the city and the built environment, since that's something you particularly focus on, wrought by the tech boom.
Right. I mean, I think first I have to give a qualification that I'm now kind of an East Bayer.
Oh.
You were driven out by the high price.
I mean, I moved to Chicago. I was in San Francisco for a long time. I moved to Chicago. I had kids in Chicago. And when you have kids, the city council votes you out, and you have to settle in the East Bay. And so I feel a little bit like.
Did you do a Kickstarter to move to San Francisco?
I don't even know. I couldn't possibly afford $3,500 a month. But the thing is so I moved here in '97 during the first .com. And a lot of the arguments were the same. I mean, this has been going on for quite some time.
But it was the first .com, so they were all slower.
But the scale of it is what I think is unbelievable. And the other part of it that makes it slightly different. And I believe that a city should function like any ecosystem, and that it should have all these different strata to be healthy and successful. But the extreme wealth of the new tech industry allows the Google buses are not attached, like the new people don't engage with the infrastructure that is actually there. And so
in what sense? I mean, they're living here. If the fact they're on the Google bus means they're living here.
But they're living here in a very bedroom community way. Right. So they're not engaging. I mean, like, I'm glad they're not all. Glad they don't all have cars and they don't drive down there. I think that's a great thing. But them putting pressure on the public transit system would maybe push our public transit in a direction that I think it needs to go, and it has never been able to go.
Isn't this just the next step from private education? We're used to wealthy people not sending their kids to city schools. Now they're doing the same thing with city buses and transport.
I think it's really apt, yeah, actually. But so I think that's the main. I think that's the main difference. The scale of it is very different.
What's the next step? If it's
what else can they
the
opt
schools,
out of?
Right. I mean, opting out of schools, buses, your laundry, your dry cleaning gets done for you. I mean, there are all these
libraries,
what
parks.
Else? I mean, what's the next victim in the outsourcing, or going around municipal services?
I don't know. I mean,
police. Right, you have your own police.
Well, at Blackwater, like guarding gated communities.
I mean,
gated communities.
I find this so odd. I mean, if you say, like, to a mayor of a city or resident of a city, we're going to locate a lot of very prosperous people in your city who are going to patronize the restaurants, patronize the local businesses, who are going to contribute to the tax base, which is going to support and possibly improve your schools, your police departments, your fire departments, who are going to some of them are going to locate their headquarters increasingly in your city, having workers in there who are going to come out every day and buy lunch and bike to work and do all the kind of things that make cities lively and patronize bars. Why on earth would you say that this is something that is to be deplored or something to be upset about?
So I mean, of course you're right about that. How do you reap those benefits and yet deal with the obnoxious overlay that they can acquire when you have people who are so wealthy that they essentially are disassociated from everyone else? I mean, when I listened to that blog post, that Facebook post we were just listening to, that sounds to me like someone who is, walking by like a disheveled homeless person in the street who's begging and has not actually talked to a poor person other than someone like that, like for so many years that he has forgotten what it's like to actually just not be wealthy and has started to see people as not really people anymore.
Mm-hmm. And I think, I agree with you. I think that the wealth actually can bring some good. And the tech people I know that I encounter are not like that at all.
You know the nice tech people.
Yeah, well, but I think that, these are people who think in terms of systems. They like to solve problems. I think these are people you want on your side in your city. And I think that is okay. And I think that there's a great potential that the people on the Google bus might be allies in making this city great.
So then what do you need? I mean, can we talk about housing for a minute? Because it seems to me, when I read those rent statistics, I thought, okay, they need to build some more apartments in the city.
Yeah,
and why not have some taller buildings along the BART lines?
No,
there seem like there's some obvious steps that
No, this is a huge
take.
problem. I mean, this is at like two forces coming at loggerheads, which are a very preservationist, very conservative way of building and running a city, which San Francisco has adhered to for decades, and against this market pressure. And this is really where the friction comes up. And I think that I am someone who, I love the character of the city. It's gonna change. It just has to. With all these people, it's gonna have to change, and we have to sort of address the city that it is now, not the city that you hold in your mind as this ideal, that what it was 20 years ago. And I think that building is a part of that, and I think that there's more cranes in the sky, like building cranes, not cranes.
Suddenly he's
than I have ever seen. I think that we've seen in decades. And I think that's actually quite a good thing. I think you need to balance this. And I think that the pressure of the tech industry being so great is actually making some of the recalcitrant forces that are trying to preserve every last Victorian. I think we have to come to a happier medium.
So one question I have is that one theory of the case is that what's happening in San Francisco is the middle class is being squeezed out, which I think it's clearly, probably, almost certainly the case. Most middle class people can't afford rents of $3,000, $4,000 a month for apartments like this, and you would have to move. You'd have to go slum with Roman over in the East Bay.
East Bay is nice.
But isn't that the case that it's not? This is not a San Francisco problem. This is a problem everywhere. The middle class, any city that is prosperous, which attracts industry and opportunity, the wealthier people are going to move in. I mean, this is what's happened in all cities. It's happened in London. It's happened in Washington, where I live.
New York.
It's happened in New York. Any city that's doing well, the better paid people are going to get closer and closer to the center and push middle class people further out. And it doesn't seem to me that is.
But that is a new phenomenon. I mean, the thing is San Francisco is functioning as a suburb of this tech industry center,
which is actually in South Bay.
Yeah, that is actually pretty anomalous, I think, and I don't think every urban center has to deal with that sort of thing.
Wait, so the problem being what?
Well, so
being a bedroom community.
Yeah, you don't live here. You don't actually ride your bike to the local cafe. You actually get on a bus at 8 o'clock in the morning. You come back. They work a lot. That's why they have laundry facilities and everything. And you come back at 10.
What increasingly what's happening is that companies locate here.
Yeah.
More and more companies are coming here so that you are.
I totally agree. I think that's a step in the right direction. I actually do think that's a step in the right direction.
So you're also arguing for people living and working in the same city.
I think that's a good thing for any city. Personally.
And New York does have that, right? I mean, some people live in New Jersey and Southern Connecticut, but right.
A lot.
Right, but also, I mean, that seems to me such a good development for urban centers that the rich people would want to come in closer for so many. I grew up in Philadelphia. We did not have this problem. The rich people were going out onto the main line and taking all their money with them and not paying city taxes. And the fear was that the city was going to be, there would be nothing left, which we are seeing happening in Detroit. We were talking about this a few weeks ago. So I guess then my question is, is the phenomenon of rich people really moving in something we can only hope for in the really lucky, hip cities like New York and San Francisco, and the rest of us will never actually have this? This is a good problem that everyone else will just continue to crave in the end, even though it has this sort of also problematic side to it.
Right. I think a lot of people crave it. I mean, I was just in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. It's a great little town, and actually quite a big town. And there's this whole effort to revive downtown, to build downtown as a place, and to turn it into a more walking city. And there's lots of, great studies about the ideas of walkability and how it makes you healthier and makes the city better. And they would love to have a little piece of this problem. The problem is like for 5 months out of the year, you cannot actually go outside in Edmonton.
So we're going to become a sledding city. So one thing I wanted to get at is that, which I think is a point, I think George Packer made this point, is one of the things that's interesting about San Francisco, and that it must be maddening if you are here, is, and why I think there's so much tension around this, is the gap between the kind of idealistic and utopian vision that the tech industry presents, and sort of its self-image of itself as we're not just making it billions of dollars, we're creating a frictionless society where you're gonna do network with people on whatever stupid thing you're networking on that's going to really improve everything for everyone, and that's what I'm up to. I'm not really trying to get to the IPO. That's really not what I'm doing. It's all frictionless. So the gap isn't the problem that in Wall Street you don't have this. In Wall Street they're just like, we're going to make money. We're going to make, we're going to get huge bonuses. We're going to buy that big apartment and spit on you from our balcony, and you're going to love it.
No,
But
we're
is
love the way
that we
gap?
don't care.
I love
how
the way
you
you changed voices between the San Franciscan guy, you're talking like this, and then the New Yorker voice. That's great. Could you read my kids' audiobooks to them?
Well, you're saying that Wall Street wouldn't have had that second post that apologized.
Yeah, they wouldn't have apologized, right? Well, they wouldn't. They're not on Facebook. They don't care about Facebook.
Yeah, that's the.
They're just like they don't even know what Facebook is except a stock symbol.
Right, and yet.
But is it? I mean, I guess is that what's so aggravating?
Well, but as a political matter, New York just rose up and gave the finger to the people who were speaking in that weird voice you were using.
Yeah, but not really, because in the end, de Blasio is not going to change things from the way it is.
But I don't think that's why he got 70% of the vote. They thought.
The rhetoric was there. But don't you feel like this is the inevitable backlash? People are tired of Bloomberg. They'd had too much of, a kind of arrogant rich guy who seemed insensitive. And
But for these reasons.
Yeah, he has the rabble-rousing rhetoric, and good for him. But in the end, his tweaks are small.
Right, but I guess my point is that whether it actually, if anything ever comes of it, they seem to have, this attitude David talks about seems to have created a mini revolution. And people are, and I think this is a little overblown, but are looking at that and saying, this is coming to the entire country, that revolution.
Yeah.
Well, here, Roman, do you think that the disconnection between what the tech industry actually is, which is namely profit-seeking corporations, and what it claims to be, which is utopian world-changingness, is part of the problem?
Part of the problem. I mean, I guess it would be more intellectually honest if they recognize the effect. And again, what I really want, and I think the problem with the Google bus is that it's imminently solvable. In a way, it's it's just a symptom of the larger thing.
So what's the solution? No Google bus. They ride the buses and then they campaign for better buses.
Well, that's the extreme one. One of them is one of the big fights is charging them for using the spaces that the Muni buses use. Okay, so that's one thing. So you can start to charge them, pretty exorbitant fees to
be in the bus lane.
Part of the infrastructure, and then whatever, and that's one way. I would love to see it to be deeper than that. I would love to have each of these companies go you can look at a sort of a design. I've seen a map that sort of charts the Google buses and all the different buses, and you go look at that, and you should bring that to Muni, and hopefully a bunch of people can get together and go, you know what? We should make this to be part of our infrastructure. We should include this loop. We should figure this out.
And that good app you designed, Google or whoever, that shows when the buses are coming, now we'll use that for the city too. I mean, wasn't Gavin Newsom actually talking about that? And then he said, oh, you know what, we don't have the budget for this right now.
To get the iPad apps. I mean, totally. I mean, I think that there's the best scenario would be to have them involved, the city to respond to what is happening. By building more places to live, by accounting for the diverse ecosystem that you need to create a vibrant city, and also maybe having the infrastructure to support these places so that these other things don't have to latch on top of it and not be engaged in the infrastructure. They should be part of the civic discussion. I think that would be that's the idealized scenario. I think that because of the rhetoric of the companies, you think that they would want to do that. And maybe the disappointment is that they might not at all want to do that.
Right. I mean, isn't the biggest gap between rhetoric and reality the open and the closed? That these are supposed to be companies that are all about sharing and openness, and yet they're creating these bubbles that move along. But, right?
I mean, just to that point, there was an interesting article in Vanity Fair this month that I read on the plane out here, which was by Paul Goldberger, the architecture critic for Vanity Fair, and he looked at the big complexes that all the corporations are building. Apple
is actually an
Spaceship
impenetrable
and
ring.
Google and Facebook. And it reminded me of has anyone read the Margaret Atwood Mad Adam trilogy, where these it's a futuristic thing, but it's a world where these corporations have set up private compounds where everyone lives and they conduct crazy, weird scientific experiments. It's exactly like what
I'm sure
Google and Facebook
that's what's going to happen.
Are planning.
No, those campuses they are creating their own little cities, which in a way it does take away from a person engaging in the city that they live in, and we want to live And I think it'd be okay if we lived with them, as long as we were living with them. You know what I mean? Like, for really living with them. And so I think that does tell you something, which is why I love the fact that more of them are opening, in the city themselves. I think that's a good sign. I think that's important.
But also, even if they didn't open in the city themselves, they were only Google. People were just taking the bus. They were coming. Isn't it still better that the Google people take the bus from here out there than that they live in a gated community out in whatever place people live in gated communities? Isn't that still better?
Because why? Because their tax revenue is here? Because they're boosting housing prices
people
up?
living in density just creates better stuff.
Well,
and gated communities are soul-sucking and murderous.
I mean, what about the middle class? What about the fact that they're displacing the middle class?
But I think the displacement of the middle class is a canard. The problem, America just doesn't have enough middle class jobs anymore. We don't create enough middle class jobs. That's the big problem with society, and that's not Google's fault, and it's not Twitter's fault. It's the fault of a society which is basically deindustrialized and doesn't have enough jobs like that. And I don't think that Google and Twitter can solve that. In fact, the closest thing they can do is having people live in cities where they're creating like at least jobs for the Uber drivers and the people who open restaurants and the people who work in
the service industry,
trinket stores. Like, that's the best thing you can have. But it's not
physically.
like, they don't have a factory where people are going to make Google. Google is not made. They don't make Google.
Okay, fair enough. But the people who can't afford apartments because the rent, $2,000 or $2,500 a month was reasonable and $32 is not. There are probably tens of thousands of people who they are making enough for X, but not for this higher price. They are physically being displaced, and they were people who were doing their dry cleaning and getting their haircut and their whatever in the city, and they weren't riding private transportation to leave it every day. I mean, aren't they, if you're going to pick as a city between those kinds of middle class, upper middle class citizens and people who are treating San Francisco as a bedroom community and they're gone all day and doing all their business and their discretionary spending in Mountain View, wouldn't you pick the first group?
Well, first of all, I walked around San Francisco. There appeared to be lots of people there. It's not like a ghost town.
You could not get a cab and you are still bitter. Yeah, that's true. It wasn't a ghost town. Good point.
Yeah.
But that doesn't
I think you should have both. I think you should have people living down there. I think you should have increased development across the whole peninsula. I think you should have increased development here and more companies here.
Everyone wants to live here anyway.
And I think that it behooves us to have people live here. If you really want to live in a sort of greener world, you actually want people living in cities, especially in cities where you barely have to heat or have air conditioning in the buildings, except for this week. That was brutal this week.
I heard it was like in the 30s.
I thought it was cold. We barely got out of the East Coast because there's snow, and then we got here and was complaining about
we don't have insulation in these places. Yeah. My kids had 5 layers on walking to school. But we want people here. Like, I think a green citizen would want people in the Bay Area as a global green citizen. You know what I mean? Because it's better than moving tech industry people to the Sun Belt where they have to have a temperature differential of 30 degrees every moment of the day. And so I think that there's a good balance to be had here. And I'm eager to see us figure it out.
All right, let's we could talk about this for days, but let's not. Let's turn to cocktail chatter. So, Emily, when you're doing shots off a Belgian supermodel, what are you going to be chattering to him about?
I'm not doing shots off a Belgian supermodel. That is your fantasy, not mine.
It's a dude. He's so good looking. Think of him as like Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Yeah. And so not a good segue into my chatter. We're going to get serious for a moment here. So a few weeks ago, a man who had been in prison for 34 years for a murder that he didn't commit got out of prison. And this is starting to happen around the country. We're maybe a little bit used to hearing about it, but usually the way people get exonerated is through DNA. You have science that is able to overcome whatever human errors were committed. this was a case where there wasn't any DNA analysis. There was no existing physical evidence. And so instead, it was really hard to unravel. It meant taking out a couple of false witness testimonies that had convicted this man. And this case, luckily for him, ended up with the Loyola Project for the Innocent. And they succeeded in exonerating him. And my sister Laura, who is here, was one of the lead lawyers on this case. You can hear my voice is shaking. It's just such an amazing accomplishment. I'm so proud of her. I really can't think of anything, any bigger impact you could have on anyone's life. So that's my shout out.
Right. Roman, what is your... you would do a body shot off a Belgian supermodel, for sure.
I've been thinking only about crazy ants. Did anyone read this?
Because of John Whelham's great story.
Yeah, exactly. So in the New York Times Magazine, John Whelham had this great story about crazy ants, which are ants that swarm. They're sort of taking over Houston and parts of Texas. And the interesting part about it is that's a strange thing to applaud, but you go.
Yeah.
But one of the things about the crazy ants is they're literally called crazy ants, raspberry crazy ants, named after a man named Raspberry to add more absurdity to this story. And one of the things about them is they swarm into electronics and then short circuit, which gets right into the heart of me. And they also the fight to eradicate them as an invasive species. The sort of fight to figure out what they were so they could begin to fight them is a really interesting just push and pull between like somebody saying no they're this new invasive species and the other one saying no they're just a variety from Florida, and it's totally fascinating. And I just keep thinking about swarming little tiny ants that look like coffee grounds. They barely are differentiated when they swarm. They look like just undulating coffee grounds. It's so disgusting.
Do you think the Google bus people are going to put those outside Twitter headquarters?
Roman, when you said that they invade electronics and that touches your heart, does that mean there's like electricity, a battery right here?
No. It's just like I can imagine. There's something about like if you've ever lived in a house where you fought ants. There's actually some kind of satisfying about in being in the war with ants. You know what I mean? When they're not but they're not like this. These are a different level. And when they get into your computer and your TV and stuff, and they start short circuiting things because their little bodies complete the circuit. Oh man, that would get. You can get into my cereal boxes, like toss them out, but that'd be war.
And what do you do with this invasive species? What do you do to stop it? I mean, do you have to change the what they teach them in their schools? How do you?
The issue is there's almost nothing to stop them. That's the real problem. They have John visits these. These places that trailer homes and like other houses, and there's nothing they can seem to do. And the exterminator who discovered them has almost given up. Like during the season that he was supposed to be there to eradicate them when they sort of bloom, he took off to fish in Canada because he's tired of the fight. And it was totally fascinating. Yeah. That was my...
In like 40 years, everyone will be like, God, I remember that was the first day we heard about crazy.
Yeah. And not to mention
they're in the East Bay.
The story itself is really fascinating, but the main thing is like John Whelham, who's a local San Francisco writer, he's so fantastic, and he just tells it so well, and that's the real thing that I love about it.
All right, I'm going to do my chatter because yours is better than mine, so you can do yours after.
Huh.
Setup.
Yeah, I think
so. There was a interesting conference in Mount Vernon, the George Washington's house, this week, which went little noticed, but I think it's going to be really important. And our colleagues Dave Weigel and Emma Roller wrote about it. It's a conference of state legislators only who got together to plan a constitutional convention. So mostly, the Constitution become impossible to amend because Congress can't pass a constitutional amendment and you can't get state legislatures.
Except the 22nd Amendment, you can amend the hell out of that.
I don't even think it was right. I don't think it was the right number. I don't think it's the right number.
The 22nd is for the two-term one. Yeah.
I didn't look it up. So.
Also, the part of the 22nd Amendment, if the president dies and you serve more than 2 years of his term, that counts as a term. That's no fun.
That can't be true.
Well-
is that true? Oh, no, I was. You're right. Sorry.
Can I get a witness?
I take it back. I was thinking
Johnson
LBJ.
didn't-
LBJ
right,
served less
he
than 2
didn't
years.
count.
So, so this interesting Tea Party movement was Tea Party and ALEC, which is this sinister state legislature organization, are trying to get enough states. You need 2/3 of states to call for a constitutional convention. And you can then pass constitutional amendments that way without having to take them through Congress. And they want to get, a balanced budget amendment, an amendment to limit taxes, an amendment that would allow Congress to overturn Supreme Court decisions they didn't like. It's a very ambitious agenda. But actually, most of the stuff that they want to do is they're not things that I want to do. But this idea of going after the Constitution again, of saying this is a living document and we have to change it and we have to fix it, is one that I applaud. And I hope that they succeed in getting this constitutional amendment planned.
No matter what ends up passing, you hope?
Well,
Let's just change it.
I think
no matter
I think if you can get
Let's
if
make
you
it
could
work.
get I think if you can get some constitutional amendments passed, I think it's worth trying to get them passed. Everyone should try. I think the left should try, the right should try. Their conference was open to legislators left and right. So
Right.
it seems
Because-
worth the attempt. Better than have this suicide pact of a constitution we have now.
I'm all for changing the Constitution, but I do think it matters what you change it to.
Oh, come
Oh,
on.
you and your details.
That Bill of Rights, I'm fond of most of the Bill of Rights.
John, what's your chatter?
Wow. So today we had this wonderful experience. Yes, it was really great. We participated in a locked room game. The three of us, and Andy Bowers was also there, and it was set up by our faithful reader, R.S. Harmon, who, there were 10 of us in this room, 10, right? Or was it 9?
11 of us.
Oh. Anyway, counting is very important in this game. Anyway, you're locked in the room for an hour, and there's a series of puzzles. The room is designed like kind of an apartment for somebody who could afford to live in San Francisco. And so there are chairs, and there's a table, and there are different pieces of artwork on the wall, and then all of it is kind of screaming out to be solved, but you're not quite sure in what way. And you have to... We participated in it with some other wonderful people who were generous enough to... we raffled off the other remaining tickets, and they gave donations to charity and joined us. And it was such a fascinating experience it was very intense for an hour. And when I say locked room game, it doesn't feel, there's no sense of peril. There wasn't a sense of claustrophobia, which I thought maybe it might be a little weird.
It's a big enough room. It's
Yeah.
true, I didn't get claustrophobic.
Yeah, and it's intense in a way that's not frightening. In other words, you might think locked room and intense, and then and that might make it feel like you're having like an hour-long MRI. But it's it was not. Everybody kind of scattered to their tasks. We were a little. We went off sort of like a shotgun blast. There was no existing structure. Although it was interesting with David. My kind of default was to kind of expect you to kind of
He did a little leading.
run
in
the show. He
beginning.
did some, but like David does, this is the way in which people sort of played to type. He did some leading, but also since he does more than just lead, he participates, he writes stories. He is actively engaged in the process, not just kind of dictating.
This is a great chatter.
He also sort of
Tell
did
me
both.
more about what David did.
And then Emily, too, just sort of snapped into this. She has this incredibly irritating thing she does, which is like she sits down and writes a story and just sits down and writes a story, as opposed to me, you sit down, you make tea, you sharpen the pencils.
I had a problem, though, which was that I had no keyboard, and so no one could read my handwriting. I
Yeah.
volunteered to be the stenographer, and I forgot that nobody can read my handwriting.
Oh, well, you seem to be actively engaged
I
towards
was
a purpose.
engaged, but not legible.
And so anyway, it sounds like those kinds of horrible kind of team building games that you might have been engaged with sometimes, where it's a lot of forced fun and there's somebody whose job it seems to be to go around saying, "Isn't this great?" But and I guess that's my job in this case. But it was such a like fascinating experience, and in the end we didn't find the key that helped us escape from the room. We had to use one of those cranes to get us here tonight, but we came sort of close. We had one last hurdle, which we didn't. I don't think we were that close to it, but if we'd cleared it, we would have gotten out of the room. So I recommend to all of you who live here that you try it out, because it's a really neat experience.
All right.
It's fun.
So we're gonna have 3 more bits of business. First, we're gonna wrap the radio show. Then we'll do the credits, and then we'll do a Q&A. That'll do it for the Political Gabfest portion of the show. You'll find a longer version of the show with more topics at slate.com/podcasts. I'm David Plotz in Washington. The Culture Gabfest starts right now. It does not start right now. That is not true.
You're not obligated to sit through that.
Actually.
All right, we'll do the credits. We're at the JCC, so I wanted to do an appropriate credits for the JCC. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, except for our show page, slate.com/gabfest, where you can find links to some of the things we talked about on the first day. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And then he suggested emailing us at gabfest@slate.com or commenting on our Facebook page, facebook.com/gabfest. And he looked and he saw that it was good. And God said, let there be a firmament in the waters. And he called that firmament iTunes. And he said, let this iTunes bring forth music and podcasts and all their kinds, the comedy podcasts and the Miley Cyrus and lo, even This American Life. And he listened and he saw that it was good, yet it was not complete. For then he created the Slate Political Gabfest in the iTunes store, and he left a comment while he was there. And his comment was, this was good, except Plotz kept on talking over Emily. Boo. And then God created the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, and from the birds of the sky he created Twitter, and Twitter begat @SlateGabfest, and lo, you shall follow it. And then God said, let's make a producer in his image, and that producer's name was Andy Bowers. And then God said, let me bring forth a helper for this producer, and I shall call her an intern, and her name shall be Rebecca Cohen. And then God saw everything he had made, and it was very good. For Emily Bazelon and John Dickerson, I'm David Plotz. Good night, and God bless. And Roman Mars. Thank you to Roman Mars for being such a great guest.
Okay, we're ready for questions. And our first question comes to your left, right here.
Hey guys, haven't seen you in all of an hour. Quick comment, I don't know how you got through that last segment without talking about Matt Iglesias' The Rent is Too Damn High. Do you read your own blogger? The actual question I wanted to ask was, we look at all of this dysfunction in Congress, and of course in California we no longer have Republicans, and that's how we're solving things, although it's still tough without a functional national government. Do you think it's plausible that in another 20 years we're going to have the change in demographics render the Republicans completely irrelevant and have to go through a period of essentially one-party rule to get to the point where conservatives act sane again?
John?
Yeah, I guess. I don't think
No.
that's. Yeah, no, I don't think that's likely. Because there's this. There's still a tension in the country, which is that while the Republicans have had a tough time at the national level, losing the popular vote 5 of the last 6 times, if you poll the ideology of the country, you still have more people who self-sort themselves as conservative than as liberal. And even now, I think this is still true, as conservative over moderate. So you're still going to have a whole bunch of people who think of themselves as conservatives. Now, the problem the Republican Party is going through is, what does it mean to be a conservative? And that's what this battle with John Boehner was with today. When Paul Ryan released his budget plan, he said, as a conservative, before answering every question that he was asked, trying to say, you people are going to attack me for not being a conservative. I used to be the boogeyman that liberals held up as being the horrible conservative. So don't say that I'm not one now. So that's the problem they're going through. I think at the national level, they will come to recognize the fact that you cannot build a majority party based on essentially a diminishing number of white men, which is where the party's headed. I mean, you can't. Mitt Romney would have had to have gotten almost 70% of the white vote to beat President Obama, and that will keep being a problem for Republican candidates, and they will find a way to solve that before the outcome you described.
The next question's on your right.
Yeah, hi. I read 2 really interesting things this week. One was an article in the New Yorker about the guy that first figured out extinction. And the author made some passing reference to the fact that we may be looking at the possibility of something like that happening to us. And the second thing I read that was interesting was something about, I think, David Simon, the guy who did The Wire. He wrote this speech or something talking about why are we not looking at people in the streets? Why are we not looking at real revolutionary occurrences in our polity? And you guys began to speak a little bit about that when Roman was with you. David, I think you actually said, you know, you were thinking about structural change and gated communities and rising up. So I'd like to hear you talk just a little bit about why it is that we have so many people who will never find work and who will never be able to afford even what used to be affordable. And where are they? What's going to happen to them? And how are we supposed to deal with that as a country?
It's just a gigantic disaster. I mean, what's hidden in the unemployment numbers that, of course, you show an unemployment figure 8%, 7.2%, whatever it is. That's not the unemployment number. The unemployment number is around 16, 18, 20% when you really look at it. There are people who've just been discouraged, who've given up, for whom there is no job. And you go to particular kinds of communities, poor rural communities, poor inner city communities, and it's the numbers are so high, you know, it makes you weep. You have entire generations of people growing up in a world where there aren't working people around them, and it's a catastrophe of the highest order. It is the biggest problem we probably face as a nation, and I do not know what the solutions are. And I'm always surprised at how little radicalism there is in this country. And I sort of come down to the idea that that the mechanisms of that the people in power are better able to control the radicals, and the radicals are able to disrupt society. And maybe that will change. I mean, as someone who's a moderate and who thinks society is basically, you know, generally okay, I hope it doesn't change too much. But it is it's incredibly demoralizing.
But I think when you talk about the lack of radicalism, I think there are a fair amount of radicalized people, but some of them, I mean, they're on the left, but they're also on the right. I mean, the Tea Party movement, you could argue, that has had a real influence on our politics as a radicalized movement for these reasons.
No, if I had to predict how what the radical movement that's going to end American government, it would come from the right, not from the left. And the American political system, as we know it, I think, would come from the right.
The next question's right here in the middle.
First off, thanks for coming to San Francisco. Don't be strangers. Come back soon.
Thank you.
Let's switch gears to national security and the Snowden revelations around the NSA and the national security state. Do you think that all these revelations will give Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon an opportunity to actually do some of the reforms that he wants to do and he's been wanting to do for these last few years? Or will our Senator Feinstein still be able to sort of carry water for the security state?
That's a really good question. Senator Wyden, I think there is some energy toward tinkering around the edges. So releasing more of the FISA court opinions, asking the NSA to be more transparent up front. And in fact, there are people within the NSA who are, you know, former NSA leaders who've been saying that the NSA, the best way it could help itself would be to be doing some of those things on its own, and that those reforms would actually strengthen the agency. I am pessimistic about some big legislative reform, partly because Congress just isn't in the business of legislating in particular, but also because I think that, and this goes with the lack of radicalism, that there has not been actually sustained energy to really rise up and protest. And part of that's because people do feel like they want to trust the government, that some of the surveillance is useful and is keeping them safe. I guess one thing I'm really interested in the last week or so is that the tech industry has started to really take a position. The tech industry is super interested in collecting all this data about us for advertising purposes, but worried about...
Not the homeless, ick.
What?
Not the homeless.
Not the homeless, but worried about the government using it. And so that is the kind of corporate lobbying in Washington that sometimes you see that at least leads to some sort of reform. But I just don't imagine this reform going terribly deep.
Emily, isn't it that this issue interesting and potentially could move forward because it is not partisan, because you have people on both sides that are very upset about it, and that there actually is a chance for those groups to coalesce.
Yeah, that's
in
true.
a way that it doesn't, like most political issues, you already know how they're going to break down because you see how the parties split on it. This one is kind of chaotic.
Right. No, that's a really good point. You have people in Republicans and Democrats who are angry, but you also have still most of Congress wanting to basically have maybe some kind of face-saving reform, but not some deep change. And the national security industry is really entrenched in Washington and Virginia, and there's so much money that goes into it. It's just hard to imagine that supply really being cut off.
Next question.
Hi, I'd like to lighten the mood for just a moment here, and given the political context in Colorado, Washington, and most recently Uruguay, I'd like to ask you guys to predict what you think will be happening in the next couple of years, 5 years, 10 years, in terms of drug policy in the U.S., and whether we may expect some sanity to enter the conversation.
I think part of it's going to depend on how Colorado and Washington manage the shift, whether it seems like it's orderly, and mostly what kind of tax revenue it brings in. Yeah. I mean, David has made this point on the show before that when you see a vice start to really pay off for the state government, like casinos, then you see lots of states wanting to follow suit because there's an obvious revenue stream, and once that's there, it's really hard to turn off, and everybody else wants a piece. And so you imagine the blue states and the purple states falling in line pretty quickly. But if, things go up in smoke in Colorado and Washington, ooh, that was accidental, but apt.
No. Yeah, at least you didn't make the "you go Uruguay, I'll go mine" joke.
Yeah, you could have that joke. Then that would be different.
The next
I stole that
question,
from the Marx Brothers.
The next question's here again in the middle.
Talking about the change between the wealth and the poor, more and more of these people that live in San Francisco need more and more care, i.e. cleaning ladies, et cetera, which means that most of the cleaning people have to commute insane distances. I subscribe to a service, and the cleaning woman comes from Pinole, which is very far away. She has to pay toll, gas, and it creates a massive traffic jam. It's fine that the Google buses are around, but how are the poor people going to manage?
Well, one thing that I think is going to happen, I mean, it's going to happen in cities that are smart about this, is there's going to be a pressure, and this is happening in my city, Washington, to raise minimum wages, to raise wages generally, so that, and because if the cleaning people can't afford to make it into the city, it's not worth it for them to take the job. Suddenly you have no cleaning people, so you're going to have to raise wages to get them in. I think that's a problem. First of all, the market is going to start to sort out that people won't take the jobs unless they pay more, but that smart cities and regions are going to say, you know what, we need to make sure we have a population of people who have work, who are earning enough to live at least remotely near us, and we do that by pushing up the minimum wage.
Next question.
I was wondering if you had any thoughts about John Podesta joining the White House. Do you think that's going to yield any benefits or change anything for Barack Obama?
Well, I was talking to somebody on the Hill today who had, but I feel like
Man or woman?
What's that?
Man or woman?
A man. Why?
Bigger than
Blonde
a
or
bread box?
brown haired?
Brown hair.
Republican or Democrat?
Bigger than a bread box. So anyway, back from that little interlude. And there have been a variety of times in the history of the Obama administration where they've said, well, they're going to improve their relationships with Congress. And so this person today, who was a Republican, was saying, maybe Podesta will start, the outreach that would be helpful to kind of improve just the normal, day-to-day things you're supposed to do. So, for example, John Boehner's office didn't hear that the White House was interested in unemployment benefits, extending unemployment benefits until last Friday. So this budget deal was basically cooked by that time. And so it would have been too late, because if you're going to extend unemployment benefits, you got to find the money if you're going to get Republican votes to pass this budget agreement, which they need. And, they had to scrape and fight and kick and come up with all kinds of backbends get the money that's in this deal right away. So finding another 26 billion would have been pretty hard and not something you wanted to start last Friday. So that's the kind of thing with, this person was speculating might be improved by Podesta. But mostly, there is a problem with layering over that I don't know if that's a specific problem with this administration, where you add one more competent person, and that's great, but it doesn't change a fundamental structural flaw. Now, I don't know.
What's the structural flaw?
What we don't know yet is whether there is a fundamental structural flaw. I mean, the president makes the case that, yes, he botched, and his team botched the healthcare.gov rollout, but the things that they did well, nobody ever knows about. So, for example, there hasn't been a natural disaster where the response from the federal teams was so horrible that we even know who runs FEMA. And so that when he's had management successes, it doesn't get written about. And that's a fair claim on his part. But we don't really know until we fully kind of walk the cat back on the healthcare.gov thing, whether it was something specific about the Obama administration, whether it's something specific about trying to do something this big in a federal government, whether it's the procurement, whether it's a combination of those things. And until you figure that out, I'm not sure what bringing a guy in does to kind of solve it. Another person they brought in is a guy named Phil Shaliro, who used to be the president's top legislative person, who worked for Henry Waxman on the Hill. And his job is to basically be the White House liaison on healthcare.gov. And the reason this is really important is that one of the reasons the president's numbers and Congress's numbers have gone down is not just that the website didn't work, but when he got in trouble for his claim that you'd be able to keep your own insurance, they were slow-footed in responding to it. So that constituents who might have been predisposed to hearing an answer from the president that explained why this promise didn't turn out to be true didn't hear it for 3 weeks. And the members of Congress who were waiting for an answer to be forthcoming from the White House had nothing to say. So they need to sort of create what they've called a political punch list, which is a series of problems they're expecting to have over the next year, so that they can be in a position to respond quickly, so constituents think they're at least on the case trying to fix whatever problems arise. And that's what this guy, Phil Shaliro, will do, and that's something that might actually, be something that will be important and that you can watch.
We're going to take 3 more questions.
My question is about polling, so hopefully this helps fill some kind of quota for John to talk about numbers again. It's about the poll that was done by the Harvard Kennedy School Institute of Politics about millennials. And the banner, the headline that came from that was that the majority of millennials disapprove of Obamacare. And obviously they're an important segment for Obamacare so that it's viable. Do we think that this is as soon as Obamacare gets better, that millennials will come back around and improve their feelings about Obama? Or do we think this is something of beginning of a fraught relationship for young Obama voters?
Right. The reason that poll sent shockwaves was because that for the policy to work, you need the risk pools to be full of young, healthy people. And because you don't want them to be full of sicker people, and that will cause premiums to go up for everybody. So the president's team has a particular job to convince younger people, and the job is tricky for a couple of reasons. One, if you're under 26, you're still in your parents' plan, and so you're not paying, and so now you're suddenly going to have to pay to be in this thing, and that doesn't sound great. And also there have been these problems, and so and also there's a barrier they found in, why do I have to buy insurance? I don't get sick, and so it's not like you're offering ice cream, and so those poll numbers are on the Affordable Care Act are not great, and they're harder to change because you're asking these people to basically spend money for something they may or may not think is a good value, A, and may or may not think they need, B. But I think those numbers, the president has a special relationship with that age cohort, and part of the problem, though, within that poll, though, is that his special relationship, the things they liked about him, is starting to erode, too. So normally what happens is when you have a problem on a specific issue, because you have a good relationship with people on another level, you can screw up on the one issue, but then, I still love you for all these other reasons, and you can have another conversation that can build up trust again. That's the thing that may be hard to do. So the great thing, though, is we'll know. We're going to get enrollment numbers, well into next year, and we'll just find out if young people are signing up. And if they're signing up, it doesn't matter whether they like it or not. it'll be, it's a thing we can actually really, really measure, as opposed to normally we're kind of making it up.
So we know which amendment David would change in a new constitutional convention. How about Emily or John? Which amendments would you change or add?
Oh, this is such a fun game. I did a whole project in Slate a summer and a half ago about changing the Constitution. I mean, one of the most obvious things to go after, especially in the wake of filibuster reform, is the composition of the Senate and the disproportionate power it gives to small, sparsely populated states. I was just seeing, Jeff Toobin wrote a big piece about this in the New Yorker last week, and the statistic that jumped out at me was that when the composition of the Senate was created by the founders, the biggest state had 11 times as many people as the smallest. Now California has 70 times the population of Wyoming. That seems to me like it's crying out for some reform.
This is sort of in the vein of David's desire to have lots of things added to the Constitution, whatever they may be. The balanced budget amendment is really tricky, and there are ways in which if Congress had to balance the budget, it could go horribly wrong. But I do like in states the way governors are forced to work with their legislatures. Because they basically have to balance the budget, and sometimes it comes up with their bad laws. But just because they execute something poorly doesn't mean it's necessarily the fault of the fact that they have to balance the budget. Sometimes it forces creative thinking. Sometimes it forces people to confront issues that they otherwise just keep kicking down the road. And as we see states and cities face pension liabilities that have been for too long ignored, and we think about problems that we have that have been for too long ignored, and the lack of, and we saw it in our constipated conversation up here about what the president would do with his last 3 years, the lack of a forcing mechanism to force people to think creatively and to get into a room. One of the things about the locked room game that I thought would be great is if you forced 5 Republicans and 5 Democrats into a room, because it would insist upon actionable, useful behavior, because otherwise nothing gets done in the room, and it would just force them to do what they seem to be averse from doing.
But you couldn't have deficit spending during a downturn. This is economic
but the thing
insanity.
Is, but I mean, my point here is that you could write it in a way that, if GDP was whatever, then your balanced budget amendment is waived for some number of years. I mean, you don't imagine the worst conception of the balanced budget amendment. Imagine one that's written thoughtfully and that takes into account some of the normal objections to it.
One that doesn't actually require you to balance the budget every year.
One in extreme circumstances gives you there's some cartilage in the system so that in extreme circumstances you can have a little flexibility so that it doesn't cause total chaos. Yes.
Our last question is right here.
So just to go back to the question of what Obama could do with his last 3 years, a few months ago, I think it was, the Attorney General made some moves towards prosecutorial discretion and addressing incarceration. And I'm wondering what you think could be more steps that the executive branch could take without legislation to address incarceration, and what's the likelihood of that happening?
Human Rights Watch just did a really excellent report about plea bargaining and the effect it has on the system, and mandatory minimums, which Congress has passed. Now, the president can't get rid of the mandatory minimums, but the way federal prosecutors use the minimums is to pile up the threatened sentences of drug offenders in particular, but really anyone who used a gun to do anything. The sentences become so high that you can't roll the dice and have a trial. And the trial rate in the federal system is now at about 3% for criminal defendants. It's not much higher in state courts either. We just don't really have trials anymore. So if the president and Eric Holder really wanted to change that, they could change the way prosecutors charge, and it would have an enormous effect on the incarceration rate.
So thanks to all of you for being here tonight. John, Emily, and David, please come back to San Francisco.
Thanks
very much.
Thank you so much for having us.